We talk about it all the time, but anytime I or one of our preachers gets up here, it's an invitation to talk. And that every conversation, every topic we discuss is always fair game for questions, for challenge, for what about this? And this is not an environment where I stand up here and I say, here's the answer. Everyone has to say, okay. It moves on. So I say that because there's certain topics, like what we're going to be talking about today, which I think in particular can feel very sensitive, very personal, very, very divisive. And what I don't want us to do is to hear something we disagree with and say, I'm leaving the conversation, I'm out. But rather I want us to engage in the conversation. And so today as we talk about God's word, as we reflect on what he has said, this is just a reminder that if you aren't sure about something, you have questions, you're wondering about a situation, I am always available to talk. It's not, hey, you shouldn't ask that because he already told us what to think. But I want the conversation. We as God's people, this is the place of all places where we should be able to have hard conversations. Because what unites us is not the same political ideology. What unites us is not the same cultural background. What unites us is that we are sinners who have been redeemed by Jesus Christ and baptized into his family. And therefore, that means that all these other things we can wrestle with together and talk about. And so this is just, I'm going to say it again throughout the sermon, but an invitation that as we talk, please feel free later, ask questions. We can talk after service during the week, but what about this? Hey, I'm not sure about that. Have you considered this? Here's a beginning with an invitation to talk. So like I said earlier, today we're talking about caring for the vulnerable, and we're talking about what it looks like for God's people to care for what sometimes you could say the least of these, those in need, those who are oppressed. And so before we get into maybe today's world, I want to just reflect a little bit on what's going on in that reading from Nehemiah and help us kind of unpack this, because you have this really interesting situation. So at this point in this story, the people are trying to resituate their city. They've rebuilt the temple. Now Nehemiah has come back. He's governor of the land, so he's a civil leader, but he fears the Lord, and so he's trying to rebuild the walls to help protect the city from being attacked by invaders or raiders or whatever it might be. And what he has is a situation where there's a famine, and you have this outcry because there's these different groups of people. You have people who are financially well off, and when the famine hits, they're like, hey, let's get some food. Great, let's buy, we're good. You have another group that says, hey, this is getting tight. We're having to sell our land, or basically like mortgaging your house, right? I'm selling my house just to eat. And then you have a third group that is so desperate, we've sold our house. We can't feed our children, so the only way to even feed them is to sell them into slavery and then use that money to feed us while they're serving somebody else. And so they cry out and say, this is horrendous. They're crying out for help. And Nehemiah sees this, and he's understandably angry because he sees this oppression. He sees these people who are hurting, who are in need. And so we're told this in verses 7 and 8, where Nehemiah says, I took counsel with myself. So he kind of gathers himself and figures out what his course of action is. It says, I brought charges against the nobles and the officials, and I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. I want to pause right there. We live in a world that uses, interest is so prevalent, right? Whether it's credit card debt, whether it's mortgages, car loans, all of it. We live in a world that interest is very normalized. Sometimes we forget that in the Old Testament, when God was instituting the nation of Israel, one of the things that was outlawed was charging interest to each other. It was just forbidden. You don't charge interest. If you're going to lend money or food to somebody, you lend it free of interest. And the reasoning, God's heart behind this is if your brother or sister is in such need that they can't feed themselves, you shouldn't look at that as an opportunity to be like, oh, I can make some money off this. What, you need money? Great. Here's the $10 to get you through the day. When you pay me back, give me 12, right? So God forbade it from the people of Israel. So Nehemiah is charging them and saying, there's a famine, there's people who are hurting, and you're breaking God's law. He is, for the people of Israel, you are not supposed to charge interest to one another. You are doing so, and you are profiting off the misfortunes of your brothers and sisters, right? Then he goes on, he says, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So he's charging the other officials and saying, you're charging interest. That's not okay. And as a result, our people are selling people off into servanthood, right? Bond servanthood, whatever you want to call it, slavery. And so you have this terrible situation going on that he's charging the other officials with. And then he continues on. This is jumping to verse 14. But he says, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. So Nehemiah sees this problem, okay? You have this oppression of people who are in extreme poverty, and it's not just that they can't attain to a certain quality of life. I want to make that very clear. These are people who, they legitimately, it's starve to death or sell everything they have. That's what they're looking at, including their children. So he calls out the officials. This is wrong. And he commands them that you need to return every field that you've taken from them. They had a similar situation if you think of like collateral on something. You'd have a pledge. So, hey, I'll take a loan. I'm taking out a loan on my field. And so if I can't pay you back, you have my field. And so he's saying you need to return their fields, their houses. This is not the time to be taking advantage of these people who are starving to death. And then notice what Nehemiah does too. He says for his 12 years of governorship, he does not take the governor's allowance, which is basically he had a legal right, totally fine, that since his whole time and effort is spent overseeing the people as their governor, he's appointed as governor, that he could, as part of the tax, take that for himself to meet his needs. And Nehemiah says, I'm actually at a point where I don't need that. And so the people who are under this heavy burden and this heavy taxes, I'm going to forego my portion of that. I don't need that allowance. And so I can alleviate the pain. So Nehemiah does two things. He sees this problem. He forgoes his own right, says, I don't need this because I need to do something. I'm going to put my own skin in the game. I'm taking a sacrifice to care for those in need. And then he also calls out those who are doing these wrongdoings, right? Whether it's the exacting of interest, which was straight up wrong, or even taking a pledge, which was legal, but maybe not needed, right? This isn't a time to take from your brother, is basically what Nehemiah is saying. So that's what happens in Nehemiah. And so what I want to reflect on today is just the role of caring for those in need as it comes to the Christian faith. Because this is not just an Old Testament idea. This is not just, oh yeah, Nehemiah did this one thing and it's really cool. But this is a big part of the heart of Christianity and how the love of God flows out through us. So John will put it this way in 1 John. He'll say, by this we know love, that he, that is Jesus, laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. So John says, Jesus laid down everything. He literally gave everything he had. He set aside his place at God's right hand to come down to earth, and then he gave up even his own life for us. And so if that love has been given to us, then if we have and we can give, then it's an absolute. It's just how God's love flows through us. So one way that we can see this is that Christ's love for those in need and the vulnerable flows through the life of his church. That it starts with Jesus, that he cares for those who are in need, because as Christians, we believe first and foremost, we were those people. We are those people. I was spiritually impoverished. I was spiritually dead. I had, as Paul says, as the New Testament says, we had no hope in this world, right? Without hope. We were that's how we were, and yet Jesus gave up everything to care for us in our need, right? And so because of that, if that's what I've been given, then my disposition outward then is to say, all right, if that's who God is and that's how he views those people, I need to do the same. So I want to talk a little bit about what this looks like today, and I want to do a couple, from the outset, just a couple things I want to be very clear on. First off, as we talk about all this, we believe, again, that first and foremost, we are all sinners, okay? When we talk about hard topics, when we talk about sticky situations, we don't come here as like, well, I'm perfect, I've never done anything wrong, and all those people are evil. But these are conversations for us to wrestle with, because we are, again, people who have received this grace and then want to pass it on, right? It first and foremost starts with the truth that Jesus gave himself for us. So no matter what we've done, we stand blameless in Jesus. Secondly, we'll talk about a couple different situations, but I want this to be very clear that there is a distinction between earthly political parties and the Christian faith. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't overlap at times and in different ways, but the problem is, and this is not true of just today. In the world, you're always going to have these different movements and these different groups, and some are pulling from different Christian ideas, some are pulling from other good ideas or not good ideas, whatever it is. But as Christians, this is the best way to put it, we don't take our cues from a political party, we take our cues from Jesus. Now, at times because we engage in the world, at times when you vote, you're going to have to make a decision, right? Or when you vote on a policy, we can't shirk that. And at times, there are policies that there's a more clear answer. And there's times where there's a candidate who maybe is more clear. And also, Christianity is not just trying to be in the middle. That's also something you hear sometimes. Because the problem with that is you're still letting two groups decide what you think. This is to say every topic, every situation, every policy, everything I do with my life, I need to look through the lens of what has Jesus spoken about this? What have the scriptures revealed about this? And that's our true north. And at times it's going to look more like one group, and at times it might not. But regardless, that's our line. What do the scriptures say? What has Jesus revealed? And how does following him lead me to follow him faithfully? So a couple things. So first off, I want to talk about the more kind of what Nehemiah is dealing with. So Nehemiah is quite literally looking at the impoverished, and he sees them and how they're being taken advantage of. And so when we think about in today's world, this is not, believe it or not, this is not an old thing or a new thing. It's a thing that constantly happens, right? That it's really easy for those who have very little are often the most vulnerable to be taken advantage of because they have no power, no influence, no resources. I mean, we talk about the interest. I mean, just think about today how many people get into these terrible cycles where they're so desperate for finances that they take out this insanely high interest loan, and then that spirals into a larger loan and a larger loan and a larger loan, right? And so this is where we simultaneously, I have to be accountable for how I spend my money and how I use it and how I steward it, and also see that there are people who, in desperate situations, get into a sort of debt bondage, debt slavery, right? And when we think about caring for those in need, again, in Nehemiah's case, you specifically have people who have, I mean, they can't eat, right? Again, it's not that they are shooting for like a better lifestyle. They're just trying to live. As Christians, we have to look at those who are starving, who are impoverished, who have nothing, and we have to have a heart for them, right? This is where if you look at somebody with material need and you have no pity, John says the love of God isn't in you, right? That's how stark he's saying, if that's how we're going to take it. Now, here's where we talk about political parties and stuff. How is the best way to care for those people? Is it a governmental program? Is it individual charity? Is it direct assistance of finance? Is it food banks, clothing? And that's all good discussion. And this is what's so beautiful about the Christian faith is we have these certain guideposts. We have to care for the vulnerable and the in need. No question, non-negotiable. How do we do that? It's a good question. Let's talk about it. What's the advantage of this? What's the disadvantage of this? How's this going? And so this is not prescribe one policy, but it does mean that as Christians, you can't look the other way. You can't just say, as a church, who cares? I'm comfortable and that's what matters, right? Because Jesus didn't take that approach. Jesus did not look at us and say, well, I'm good up here. You have fun down there. But he came down and gave himself for us. And so we say, what do we have and what can we do? We can't fix all the problems, but how can we help? This is why, as a church, we partner with so many different ministries because we, as a congregation, have a variety of things that we do, but we also come alongside groups that are proclaiming the gospel and also caring for those in need. So we partner with a group like Christ's Body, which does incredible work, and many of us have volunteered there, and we often have clothing drives, and we help hand out food, and they do incredible work going to those who lack shelter, who lack food, and being Christ's body to them, right? Providing for them, right? We talked about Sarah's home earlier and the need of those who have suffered from human trafficking and the pain that that's experienced. And so this is why as a church, so we partner with these groups, we think about these things because we have to be looking out for those who lack a voice, who lack in need, who lack power, and say, how can we serve them and help them? Not with the end result that everyone's going to have the most luxurious life, but gosh darn it, God is a God who cares for us and provides for the birds and the lilies and says, day by day I'll take care of you. And he invites his church to be part of that care in one way, shape, or form. So when we think about the vulnerable, we have to think about the impoverished, we have to think about the poor and what we can do and what things in our world and what things in my own life are helping that or hurting it or perpetuating cycles, whatever it might be. And again, this is where conversation is really helpful. So you have the poor, you have those who lack food, who lack clothing. Another group that I want to talk about today as we think about the vulnerable, and especially if you think about people who do not have a voice, I want to talk about the unborn. So when we talk about Christians viewing people as people and loving those who are vulnerable, who are at risk, who are taken advantage of, in today's world, one of those groups is those who are not yet born, right? Human beings who quite literally don't have a voice because they're still breathing amniotic fluid. They're still developing those vocal cords. And as a result of it, it's really easy to view them as less than a person. And so when we talk about things like abortion, and again, this is where I'm just inviting you all, please, let's talk, right? When we talk about things like abortion, the reason that Christians believe that, or oppose something like that is because we believe that mother is a human being who deserves to have her life protected and cared for. And we believe that child is a human being who deserves to have their life protected and cared for. Both are true, right? We love both of them. And in those situations in particular, the vulnerable one, most of the time, is the one who can't say, wait, what about me? Because they're viewed as less than. And I want to unpack this a little bit because I know this is one of those topics that gets so much buzz in conversations online and social media, but if we just think about, even just scientifically, right, if you're trying to identify somebody who did this, you run a DNA test, right? When does a person get their DNA? It's at the moment of conception. It's this moment when the fathers and the mothers' contributions come together, and in that moment, you now have a new human being with its own set of DNA. In that moment, it's boy or girl. It has a hair color. It has all sorts of genetic dispositions and attributes that, if allowed to continue on, are going to do just like a child grows into an adult person. It's going to continue to develop exactly how it's already laid out, set from the very first moment. And any point after that, if you take conception, any point after that, if you were to say, well, now it's a person, it becomes fairly arbitrary. Because if you try to say, well, it's when they can live on their own, right, apart from assistance, well, my newborns have never been able to live apart from assistance. They've always needed people, right? If you try to say it's whatever line you try to put, it in the end it becomes fairly arbitrary, because at that point you have this new creation that is now its own DNA, its own person. And so just from a scientific standpoint, it's acknowledging that is who it is, that is the case, right? And then play it forward. Now, this is also what you see. If you were to look at the scriptures, you'd see like, oh, this is kind of how the Bible talks. This is how God talks. So like in places like Psalm 51, David, when he's feeling so convicted with his sin, he'll even say, in sin did my mother conceive me. So David is talking about his spiritual state when he was conceived, that at that moment, I was already, I've been in sin since I was conceived, right? That's how far back it goes. That's his claim. Or Psalm 139, when the psalmist is saying, Lord, I can't go anywhere that you're not with me. I could climb the highest mountain, the deepest sea. I could go to the pits of death, and you could still find me. Lord, even when I was in my mother's womb, you were there, and you were knitting me together, right? From that first moment, you're just piecing me together into this beautiful thing that I am, right? And so scripturally, it just matches what we see biologically, that that this life, as soon as it's formed, mother, father come together, boom, it's now a person. And if it's a person, then it's a person worth caring for, especially because it's so vulnerable that it can't speak up for itself. It can't advocate for itself, and it's so easily dismissed, right? And so this is why as Christians, we speak up on things like abortion, not just so for ourselves, right? So if I or my family finds ourselves with this new little one, this new gift, we want to care for that, we want to nurture it, we want to protect it. But also, right, Nehemiah says, I'm going to contribute, I'm going to throw my money into the pot, but also I'm going to call out those who are doing wrong. This is where we also need to speak up for those who are vulnerable outside of ourselves too. Right? Because this is the heart of the Christian claim, is that I care about the mother and I care about the baby, and I don't want either to be harmed. Okay? And so it's incredibly and completely out of love. It's not about trying to control somebody. It's not trying to say, I'm trying to keep you down. It's trying to say that that child is a child that can't speak for itself, and I care about it so much that I'm willing to have this conversation to protect it. Okay? And so I do want to say, are there some really rare cases where a mother's life is also at risk, right, because of the pregnancy? Ectopic pregnancy, that little child unfortunately implanted in a fallopian tube. Yes, and we can talk about all of those. And there might be some times where we have to come to some really difficult decisions where it's one life or two lives. Are we saving one? Or are we saving none? But just notice that even in that conversation, we still are saying there's two people here, and we want to do our best to save and protect as many as possible. So it's not done lightly. And again, so there are rare cases, and this is where, again, we can talk about, what about this situation? How about this? Yes, let's talk about it. But as we think about our role in protecting those in need, the unborn are classic case. Man, they can't even speak for themselves. So where's their voice? We're their voice, right? And this gets to other things. So if you believe, like I said, I think scientifically, I think biblically, that life starts at conception, this also touches on other things like in vitro fertilization or IVF. Because if in vitro fertilization, there's a lot of things that if you ever want to talk more about this and get in depth, I would love to talk about a lot of different aspects. But at its fundamentally, there are very rare cases when you don't, the term used in the industry is fertilize more eggs. You could also say conceive more children than you allow to be brought to birth. So often in IVF, you're conceiving more children because the success rate is not perfect, and so you're hoping that a certain number will implant. So here's the challenge. If we believe that life starts at conception, then those children that are conceived in such a way, all of a sudden those are children now that are on ice or considered genetically not as viable or as desirable. And even the ones that are considered viable, often you're left with, I'm just going to pick a number, like 5 new children, and most of the time, 1 or 2 are desired. And so what happens to the other 2 or 3, depending on how the process goes? Put in a freezer. And that's not a state that persons are meant to be in, okay? Now, I realize this is all of these are touchy, and I just want to say this does not invalidate any child conceived of IVF, because it's actually validating that they are just as much of a person as any kid, any person. It's saying, no, actually, I believe that as soon as you were conceived, you were worth speaking up for and protecting and caring for as much as I care about your brothers and sisters who maybe didn't get that opportunity. And this is one of the challenges, and this is why as Christians, we're kind of led away from this, and we kind of have to speak out and for our own selves avoid this, because there's no good number, but on estimates, there's somewhere over 1.5 million conceived children just chilling in a freezer right now, right? And they can't say anything. They can't say, hold up, help me. And so as we think about our role in this world, speaking for the impoverished, and we can talk about refugees who are in fear of their life in their native country, and we can talk about and the unborn, and there's all sorts, right? We could be here all day talking about groups that we need to care for. But our heart is always that we view other people not as whether they're valuable to us or whether they help us, but every human being is somebody made in God's image. Every human being is somebody who Jesus died for, and therefore we need to care for. We need to love. And this is where I love church history, because we can look to our mothers and fathers of the faith to see how this has played out. So in the early church, you find yourself in a Roman society, and it was incredibly common at the time that if you gave birth to a child that you did not want, you would abandon it, right? You would leave it in a junk pile to die. You'd leave it in a public space, hoping somebody would find it, whatever it is. But you didn't want it, whether you didn't think you could care for, whether you thought it would affect the quality of life of your family, whether you didn't like the gender of it. We have a first century, or 1 BC, so just before Jesus was born, letter from a Roman soldier telling his wife, I love you, I miss you. And he says, by the way, if you give birth while I'm gone, if it's a boy, great. If it's a girl, go put it somewhere. And the Christians, because they follow Jesus, they said, wait a minute, every human being is somebody made in God's image, Jesus died for, that he desires to be cared for. And so, you know what they started to do? They started to not only, if they saw a kid, help it out, they'd go looking for them. They'd say, where do people usually leave babies? Let's go there. And they'd start, just gathering up these children and raising them. You talk about, they weren't setting out hey, I'd love to get 3 more kids, but that's what we got today, because these kids, otherwise, they need help. And so the church came alongside and saw those who were vulnerable and hurting, and they didn't just say, hey, somebody should do something about this, but they said, no, this is our problem too. That we're going to take this upon ourselves. We're going to welcome them in. We're going to give up our convenience, our life, in service towards these little ones. Yeah. So at all times, we need to be looking out for those who are in need, who are vulnerable, who are in want. And let me just say this, because I know that these topics affect everybody in this room, or somebody that everybody in this room loves. Okay? I'm not oblivious to that. And this is why when we think about our lives as Christians, and next week we're going to talk extensively more about the role of confessing our sins, but when we come to Jesus, again, we don't come as somebody of I've never done wrong, right? We come as people who have sinned in myriad ways. And if you want to see what a sinner looks like, you all are looking at him right now. And this is not a casting of stones. This is not a beat down, and let's talk about how wicked some people are. This is to say that no matter what, all of us have overlooked the poor and the in need. All of us have, like in the Good Samaritan parable, been that priest and the Levite who have seen a problem and just said, I'm going to walk on the other side. I don't want to deal with that right now because I have something to get to, right? All of us have been heartless at times or been deriding towards those who are desperate, right? All of us have not cared for and cherished life as we should. And so even if we have neglected the poor, even if we've had an abortion, even if we have used IVF and discarded embryos, discarded children, there is forgiveness. That Jesus does not look at us and say, oh, no, that one's out. Sorry. No, but Jesus loves us and he loves those children. And he loves all people so much that when we come to him and we say, Lord, I've sinned. And sometimes the Christian life is just realizing the depth of that sin. Not a day goes by when I'm not reading the scriptures and I don't see more things wrong with me. But as we do so, as we search that, as we realize that we come to Jesus and we say, Lord, I've done things that I wish I could change. I wish I could go back, and it's wrong. And Jesus, he takes the sin and he hands back grace and righteousness. Because no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, we all come to Christ having sinned. There's nobody who came to Christ and was like, I'm perfect. Jesus, you're perfect. Great, let's hang out. We all come because we are broken, because we have sinned, we have violated God's law, we have hurt other people, we have done all sorts of things. But in Christ, we all stand blameless. That when he looks at us, he doesn't categorize us and he doesn't say, all right, you're my really good Christians and you're my so-so, or you've done this. He says, no, when we come to Christ, when we confess these sins, he is faithful and just, and he cleanses us from all unrighteousness and forgives us of all sins. that no matter what we've done, no matter the weight that we feel, we get to come and we get to confess it and say, Lord, I've done this. And he says, I know and I love you and I forgive you. And we stand righteous once again and blameless. And the devil can't accuse us because we're forgiven. So then in that righteousness, we go and we look out for the vulnerable again. And by his grace, we try and rectify things if we can still do something. And so that might mean if we've used IVF and there's 2 more children, we try to give those children a shot, right? I know Christians who have actually adopted other IVF-produced children because they wanted to give them a shot at life, right? Because right now they're alive, but they're just frozen. Give them a chance to grow. It might be that. It might be speaking out, it might be advocating, it might be a hard conversation with a loved one or a family member when they're in a difficult situation. And also, if I'm going to say, like, if I have somebody in my church or my family who finds a pregnancy and they have a child now that they're not sure, I don't know how to care for this, well, that's not just their problem, that's my problem. All right, I'll watch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right, how can we help support you financially? This is where we all come together to care for those in need. And again, as we do so, we're gonna mess up, we're gonna screw up at times, and yet we come to Jesus and we live in his grace, and we're forgiven once again. So I'm gonna close by how I opened. Please, let's talk. As we wrestle with these things, these are things that are important because they affect all of us. And we would be negligent to avoid them. We'd also be doing our poor and our unborn brothers and sisters a disservice by not speaking up for them. But as we wrestle, I want you to hear this, that no matter what has happened from the time you were conceived to now, in Jesus, you stand holy, you stand righteous, you stand blameless. That's who you are. He invites us to go and proclaim that and care for those who need it as well. We do all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.